Let's discuss the parts of the gland. Starting from the top, the apex projects downward and overlaps the posterior belly of the digastric muscle and the adjoining part of the carotid triangle. Through this surface, the cervical branch of the facial nerve and posterior divisions of the retromandibular vein emerge. The base is concave and related to the external acoustic meatus and the posterior aspect of the temporomandibular joint. The structures emerging through it are the superficial temporal vessels, the auriculotemporal nerve, and the temporal branch of the facial nerve. The largest surface is the superficial surface. It is covered from superficial to deep by skin. Superficial fascia containing anterior branches of the greater auricular nerve, the platysma muscle, and parotid fascia. Moving on to the anteromedial surface. It presents a groove formed by the posterior border of the ramus of the mandible. It is related to the masseter, medial pterygoid muscle, posterior border of the ramus of the mandible, and the temporomandibular joint. The branches of the facial nerve emerge on the face from underneath the anterior margin of this surface. The posteromedial surface is related to the mastoid process, sternocleidomastoid muscle, posterior belly of digastric muscle, and the styloid process, along with the muscles attached to it. The trunk of the facial nerve and the external carotid artery enter the gland through this surface. Let's move on to the borders of the gland. The anterior border separates the superficial surface from the anteromedial surface. Underneath this border, various structures emerge in a radiating fashion, which includes the temporal branch of the facial nerve, the zygomatic branch of the facial nerve, transverse facial vessels, and the upper buccal branch of the facial nerve. Then comes the parotid duct itself, below which we have the lower buccal and the marginal mandibular branches of the facial nerve. The posterior border separates the superficial surface from the posteromedial surface. Underneath this border, the posterior auricular vessels and the posterior auricular branch of the facial nerve emerge.